This is the value of walking in Africa. And funny enough, we have Jim Walker with us.
Hi, yeah, thanks very much for including me here. I know my name, no one ever really believes that I am really called Jim Walker, but honestly I am. But of course, we're all walkers, aren't we, in some form or other?
You must have heard that joke a number of times before.
Sure, but people don't forget me, and that's great. And we've been doing this, talking about walking for more than 20 years now, all over the world, but really delighted to be part of this panel here and talking about walking in Africa, which of course is the essential mode for all of us.
Well, Jim, maybe give us a quick brief look into what is Walk 21 Foundation.
We started Walk 21 as an NGO more than 20 years ago now, when we realized in many countries where people were choosing to give walking up as soon as they could afford to. And that was having an impact on their health, on the environment, and on the economy. And as we learned later, on even on their happiness. And we wanted to work out why that was and what could be done to mitigate that and to support people, because actually, it's a positive thing, you know, and actually, although it's the first thing we like to do, we're very proud of doing as a baby, and it's the last thing we want to give up when we're older. That bit in the middle, sometimes we can just take it for granted and forget about it. And we've spent many years now working with researchers, with academics, yes, and we've got some in our session today, but also with practitioners and policymakers who are really making changes now to make sure that people not just have the right to walk, but actually the right to enjoy it.
Well, it's really great to hear that something is being done about it. And you're going to be leading us through this panel on the value of walking in Africa. You're more than welcome to take it away and introduce the panelists.
That's great. Thank you so much. Yeah, we've got three great speakers today, and I'm really delighted that we've got this session. As you heard from the minister and from Janine, you know, this is all about putting people first, and so it's great that we're up front and talking about people. We don't actually know how many people are walking in Africa, but you know, you hear these numbers about 70%, 80%, sometimes 90%. If you look at the official data, very often countries will say to you they've measured maybe 40%. You know, the problem being that we don't really measure it very well. And actually, one of the things that we do measure almost everywhere in the world is only about safety. It's actually about the numbers of people who've died. And if that's the only thing that we record about whether people walk or not, you get into this parallel world of working out whether it's actually safer not to walk or safer, you know, to go out and walk. You know, what is the problem here? And we are really pleased to be working with Share the Road, with Janine, actually, with many countries and projects to actually work out how to improve the walking conditions for all the people who are walking. We reckon that it's at least 90% of people who are walking in Africa. And we're really keen that in this session, we talk about the positive things that are happening in many, many places to actually make that not just safer, but easier and nicer. Because there's lots of reasons why you might be lured to stop doing it. But actually, when we do, what we know from lots of places in the world is that actually that does have that negativity, as we were talking about, and the reason why we set up Walk 21 all those years ago. So three great people. We're going to be talking with Chris. Chris Kost is from ITDP, and he's going to present to us in a minute, particularly about his work, who's been working with many countries over many years about policy, design guidance, the need for that to be embedded at a decision-making level to really effect change on the ground. So maybe before I introduce all the others, maybe we'll just invite Chris to just say a little bit about his work and what he's been doing, the importance of policy and design. Thanks, Chris, over to you.
Great, thanks so much, Jim. It's really great to be here again to talk about this really critical issue. And I think we heard from the Ethiopia Transport Minister that, you know, we really need to change the way that we're planning our streets in cities across the continent. So I want to take you to on a tour of a couple of cities that have been making really notable investments in their walking and cycling facilities. So I'll share my screen now. Hopefully you'll be able to pick up the slides in just a moment. And we can look at a couple of these examples. So first stop is Dar es Salaam. In Dar es Salaam, the city launched a first phase BRT corridor. It's 21 kilometers long, and it's carried as many as 200,000 people a day. But the city made sure that this project wasn't just about the public transport. So alongside the corridors, they implemented these wide walkways. They developed continuous cycle tracks and made sure that it was just as easy for people to walk and cycle along this corridor as it was to take the bus. So it's really a multimodal vision for mobility. The intersections have universal access, so you can see the really great finishing here, smooth ramps, good interface between the materials so that everyone can use these facilities. And one of the most dramatic transformations is in the city center. This is what Morogoro Road used to look like. A lot of parking, a lot of vehicles, people had to walk in the middle of the carriageway. And this is what it is today, where all the cars have been removed. Again, going back to what Minister Dagmo was saying about giving priority to people rather than vehicles, and creating a much nicer environment for the local residents and visitors to this area of the city. Next, I want to take you to Kisumu. This is a city with a population of about 500,000 in Western Kenya. And the city over the past year has made significant strides to transform the walking environment. You can see one of the new walkways here. They're wide, they provide universal access. And it's really serving the majority of users. We did surveys, we did a household survey actually in the city, speaking to Jim's point about the lack of data, and we really tried to drill down to how are people moving around and understand the dependence on walking and cycling. And we found that overall it's 53% walk mode share, but then there's a big difference if you look at it by gender. So 60% of women are walking, while only 44% of trips that men are taking are by foot. So given this,
can I interrupt you there, Chris? That data is fantastic to see that. Do you split that down by age and ability as well? I mean, it's often hidden, isn't it? Those trips that are made by children, by older people, people with disabilities. We know they walk more than many as well.
Yeah, definitely. And in this data set, we did disaggregate by, those different, by the location where people are staying, by age, all those things. So yeah, it would be really great to drill down and see more of that, because especially school children in Kisumu make a lot of trips by foot, and the conditions on the main roads are very unsafe. And what we've seen, as in many cities across the continent, is that there are just a few main roads that account for the vast majority of crashes and pedestrian fatalities in the city. So it's critical to look at those different user groups and see how they move. So, just to show a few more shots of how the city's been doing this transformation, they've been retaining all the existing trees in the process of construction. So you have this really beautiful and comfortable walking environment, adding street furniture so that people can stop to rest, and the street can become a space for socialization and not just for fast movement. And then this was one of the most fascinating things the city did, where they've been reclaiming the public realm. So they're taking down this compound wall outside one of the main commercial complexes in downtown Kisumu, and turning over this space back to the public realm. And so you can see where the footpath was built in the first phase, and in the second phase, they're going to demolish the rest of the compound wall that you see here and make a wide footpath that'll incorporate that tree that's in the middle of the shot. So, this is a city that's really committed to changing the face of the city and, making sure that everyone has equal access. And then the safety has been a key element. So the city's been developing these raised pedestrian crossings that have ramps for cars, so vehicles actually have to slow down. And you can see also the kind of finishing that they've done, where the top of this raised crossing is perfectly aligned with the median. So there are no level differences. And so this is accessible for all. So I think we really need to set higher standards. We need to demand better in our cities and make sure that we're moving in this direction of prioritizing sustainable modes. And just finally to talk about the scale up that's happening, UNEP has been supporting work on walking and cycling strategies around the continent. So several have been adopted so far, and there are more in progress. And the final thing I wanted to highlight is that we have to change the design standards because most African countries have really outdated highway design standards. Many of them are based on the AASHTO Green Book from the US. So it's really a car-centric approach to design, and we've got to change that. Kenya is one of the countries that's doing that by adopting a modern street design manual for urban areas. So thanks. That's just an overview. I wanted to give a couple examples because we really have a lot of positive change, and we need to scale that up elsewhere.
Chris, you talk. It's brilliant to see all those great examples. It looks like everything's really positive. I know when we look at the IRAP data, looking at the numbers of people who are walking on streets in Africa generally, 80% of them don't have a footpath, don't have a crossing, and the speeds are of a pace that make things difficult. What you're showing here is that there are designs that can be done. There are off-the-shelf examples that people can use. You talked about trees, seating, crossings, space, width. I mean, this isn't complicated stuff. Is this something that you think anyone could do in Africa?
It's definitely not complicated. It takes political will. That's the key ingredient. We have to be willing to change the design of streets, because usually we design the streets for signal-free movement of private cars. We prioritize car speeds above all else. And that's just not safe for all the rest of the road users, and we often try to put people on footbridges to get them out of the way of the cars. Footbridges are not pedestrian infrastructure. They're actually car infrastructure. They're often mislabeled as pedestrian facilities. So that's the key thing. Like, we have to change that mindset so that we're not, just purely focused on high speeds, but we really think about the needs of all users and bring that together in our designs. But it can be done. It can be done across the continent. We're seeing more and more cities take this up, but we need to do it faster. Right now we're building a few hundred meters here, a kilometer there. We have to scale this up to build hundreds of kilometers, thousands of kilometers across the continent. And we need to make sure that development banks are financing this work. So rather than just financing highways, we've seen, Abidjan just launched an urban highway project, nearly 100 kilometers of urban highways. Other cities are doing that. We have to shift those investments to more sustainable alternatives, and then we can get the job done.
Oh my goodness, he's giving us a whole challenge here, but you make it sound very easy. I think a lot of people are going to be ringing you asking for this sort of support, Chris, but I really appreciate you laying out the fact that this is not complicated. It's something that can be done, is being done, and something that people can be adopting, adapting, and getting on with. Thank you so much for that as a great positive story to start us off. I'm going to invite Sean to come and join us next. Sean Cooke is from university in South Africa. He's one of those people who he's a civil engineer, but he's also somebody, so he knows about building it. He knows what it should look like out there on the ground. So he takes sort of Chris's documents, if I might suggest, and he knows how to sort of interpret that and deliver it in the right setting. But Sean, we heard from the minister this morning, someone who's positive, who gets it. Chris talks about leadership. What do you think of the arguments from your experience working in South Africa, presenting the sort of the case for walking? How do you think we're going to get that leadership replicated? What would be the messages that you would give to help build the case and talk about the benefits of walking?
Thanks, Jim. Great question. Morning to Chris and to everyone here. I think that what people might not know is that I've spent a number of years now embedded in the city government here in Cape Town and working with a number of representatives within the government. And I find that the decision-making often comes down to economics. We like to think that it's engineering, or maybe it's a lot of the kind of developmentalist values that we have, but it's often an economic decision at the end of the day, because we have to show that we're creating value for the public money that we're spending. And so I would like to pick up on a point that the minister made this morning relating to the economy. And it's a point that I don't think is made often enough, and that is that vehicles don't buy things, people buy things. And that means that walking is the bedrock of consumer spending. And that might sound controversial, especially when I bring it up to engineers, but it's quite simple when you just imagine what a shopping mall is. A shopping mall is just a street that you then pedestrianize, make it nice enough to walk on, and you put it inside of a building with shops along it. And so shopping malls show that pedestrians are the buyers within our society. If you are buying something in person, then you are a pedestrian. And the problem for shopping malls is that because it requires driving all the way to them to be able to walk in a safe environment, it means that there's actually quite an impediment to get there. And if you can, as we've seen through COVID, if you're wealthy enough to afford a car, especially going into the future, you'll be wealthy enough to shop online. And so the shopping malls are very worried right now that e-commerce is going to eat up a lot of their business. And so we need to look at, in the first case, where high income spenders are pedestrians, and therefore where they will be buying things in person rather than online and supporting these much larger international firms, where they'll be supporting local firms. And where their pedestrians are generally in recreation, when you go out to restaurants, when you go out to walk around the parks. And that is why Cape Town is very much looking at pedestrianizing their certain of the streets within the CBD, or at least allowing the restaurants to lease road space in order to expand their services to allow socially distant eating out, so that we can support our local businesses. And I think that when we see that the support is there for the higher end, then we need to reevaluate how we're treating our middle and lower income spenders. Because really, for them, they've always known that pedestrians, that walking is the bedrock of consumer spending, and that the reallocation of road space towards commerce is key to driving economic growth. So if you look at the street vendors, if you look at the small and medium enterprises, that is the bedrock of the economy for most communities around our continent, and that is all predicated on walking. So I think we need to, or we're beginning to reevaluate why on private land, such as shopping malls, we treat pedestrians as if they're royalty, but then in the public space, we don't give them the types of infrastructure that they need to be able to spend the money that they want to spend in order to have a fulfilled life. And so I think that when we look at the post-COVID economic recovery for our cities and for our countries, we need to look at the fact that pedestrians are the buyers. The buyers are walking. We need to provide them with safe environments in order for them to be able to walk, so that we can grow our economy in a resilient and in a safe way. And so I think that that's a point that we in engineering don't make very often, because we don't see the role that we play in the economy as much as we should. So I think that's something that is definitely a topic of conversation in the rooms that I'm in at the moment.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. That's a really great point, well made. I think when we look at the design of shopping malls, very often they are perfect pedestrian places, aren't they? They're designed in a way to sort of lure you in, make you feel welcome. There's a smell of coffee. It's a full-on sensory experience. There's coffee, there's children's play areas very often, fake trees, that lovely plant.
Exactly.
I mean, it's like the perfect street, isn't it? But often it's indoors. And we create these situations, as we know, in lots of countries where people are actually going there, driving to these places to go for a walk, let alone shop and things. Do you see that happening in Africa? Are other streets basically becoming internalized and sort of privatized? Is that the future, that we need to sort of privatize streets?
Well, I obviously don't think so, because I think that the e-commerce sector is going to cannibalize shopping malls. But I think that the point that you really hit on there is experience. What the shopping mall owners who are now discussing to me, they were talking about having outdoor shopping malls to have a more experiential or a higher value experience. But I had to explain to them that they just described a street. An outdoor shopping mall is just a street. And so they just buy up property along a street, work with the community there, and create a more welcoming environment to walk, or to cycle, to use micromobility, to bring your family. So I think that part, that experiential, that recreational element is going to be key to consumer spending. And specifically, I think it's going to be key to local consumer spending, or spending on locally owned businesses, because as e-commerce just keeps driving up more and more and more, we're going to see so much money shifting towards these large multinational firms. And I think that when who was hurt most by COVID was the small and medium enterprises, and they are absolutely dependent upon pedestrians, footfall, the people who are walking past their shops. And I think that we need to really support that footfall in order to be able to protect those businesses.
Okay, fantastic. Look, we've still got one more speaker to introduce. I know she had a few problems with connections originally, but Elleni, are you there now and can you join us? Fantastic.
Yeah, I'm here. Can you see me? So, sorry, I had like small internet connection problem a while ago.
Thank you so much for joining us. You're working with WRI and World Resources Institute. You're one of these sort of brokers, aren't you, to some extent? You come in, we heard already from the minister in Ethiopia, who is saying all the right things. We've talked about Chris here, who's already highlighted the policy side about how to sort of translate that political commitment into a document and start thinking about what it would look like. You've heard Sean talking about the economic case, about getting everything right so that people are thinking about designing experiences. But what's your experience of getting that right, the handover between commitment to policy, policy to delivery, actually getting something visible on the streets? What have you seen and what's it like working on the ground?
So yeah, thank you. But first, before I start, I would like to wish our Muslim brothers and sisters a happy Mawlid. Today is a holiday. They have joined us. And having said that, I would like to say that the leadership, the minister has said it well. In Addis, the best thing is we have leaders who are like taking or prioritizing the need of pedestrians and non-motorized transport forward. It hasn't been easy, but now it has taken on. And I just wanted to take you to a genesis. I mean, to link what the leadership is doing, what the community is trying to do with the experience that we have when it comes to a car-free day. It started, I think, in 2018. The first car-free day that we had was supported by the then deputy mayor, and they closed 4 kilometers of road in the middle of the city. It's like very courageous and very. It was highly supported by the community, by residents of the city, and following that, until we had this pandemic problem, the city kind of institutionalized this and attached it to the agency, traffic management agency, who kind of took the responsibility to implement this car-free day every month for a half day in 6 different corridors. I have a picture, team. If you can help me post it, set it up, that would be great. So what happened is the deputy mayor, the Transport Bureau of Addis Ababa, and the agency that's responsible in partnership with WRI and another local government pushed this car-free day, which was rebranded, I would say, as Mangad Lasso, which literally means roads for people. Yeah, these are some of the activities that took over in those corridors that I mentioned. So until the COVID pandemic, we had 6 corridors, about 15 kilometers of road in Addis Ababa blocked. The other important thing that we need to know is by adapting what Addis has done, other 7 secondary cities kind of took on this responsibility as well and managed to organize car-free days. It's not as consistent, but then what's very important is that the thinking is there. The mindset, to a certain extent, has been challenged to respond to the community's need. The other important thing that we need to take is the community, even if it's advertised, the community took over the responsibility and start to block roads, for preparing for those half-day closures. And as you can see in these pictures, people go out on the streets. Children, as you can say, started to play around on those streets and claim and make those necessary pressures for the city to respond as well. But then,
can I just interrupt, because this is really interesting. That actually what you're saying is the community want this.
Yes.
you started it being about the mayor taking the leadership and then the agency deciding which roads were closed, or as we might now say, are open to people. But the community are the ones who said, we're coming out, we're going to enjoy this, and actually we want more roads than this. We want more public spaces to be imagined. Is that what happened?
That's what happened for different reasons. You know, and if you know, African cities have like challenge in kind of providing all the safety precautions that needs to be to kind of organize such events. So what happened is community kind of took over, because these corridors were spread all over the city. So in when there are shortage by the traffic police to kind of provide those safety precautions, community took over. On top of that, community were like, they were waiting eagerly, I would say, to have that car-free day on Sundays. So it was very, I would say it was taken over by the community until we had this COVID pandemic. And recently, with the leadership of the ministry, this has restarted, including cycling in additional four corridors in Addis Ababa.
Did you have other pictures you wanted to show us of smiley people looking like they're enjoying themselves on those streets?
Yeah. So these are some of the pictures. You know, people exercised, women walked. So it was a very interesting and enjoyable day, I would say. I had like another picture. I don't think I had it in here, but even when it rained, people like were out on the streets because they enjoyed it so much. The other important thing is there is a shift on how the government is responding to such interests. There's a change in how streets walkability are kind of the cities are trying to improve walkability by redesigning and implementing pedestrian-friendly infrastructure. As you can see here, these are two secondary cities where the infrastructure for walking has been implemented. You see it in different parts of Addis, and you see it in different parts of the other regional cities as well. The other important thing that shows that there is a commitment and there is a pressure towards that is, as our Chris has said it, our minister has said it, is we have in place some of the crucial policies and strategies. We have the leadership, but then we have to kind of figure out how to enhance our investment in this sector. What you can see, what we're trying to support WRI and these local NGOs to try to support local sub-administrations, I would say. If you, I give you a highlight of how Addis is organized. We have 10 sub-cities. Addis Ababa is divided into 10 sub-cities. So we're because of high demand by those lower level administrations to organize car-free days, we have developed a manual, I would say, a toolkit that could guide them to organize a safe car-free day. So this is where we're at. Of course, we need
that could be used anywhere. You could use that manual anywhere. Is it something we could all get access to, and anybody could adopt it? Could they?
Yeah, we had like this experience we adapt from our India office in WRI India. And we are changing it to translating it into Amharic, the local language, to make it easy not only for Addis but other parts of the country as well.
This
is where we are at right now. Yeah.
Is this to target communities, or are you still giving it to mayors? Is it agencies? I'm still interested about this. Who's getting permission to actually reallocate that space or reimagine their cities or have those enjoyable experiences? Who do you think is the best to engage first? Who should be reading that manual first, do you think?
So I would say, because the city is supporting this process, the second in line to who would be interested is these local administratives who are responsible to, administer their local jurisdictions, I would say. So this will be very good for them, and NGOs and other private organizations who are interested to support this process can easily access this. The other thing I want to maybe mention at this junction is, because of the popularity of Car-Free Day, the city is thinking of pedestrianizing a segment in the heart of the city, I would say. In around Piazza, I'm sure Chris knows which area I'm talking about. They're trying to pedestrianize a whole corridor, and a study is underway to make that a possibility.
So these things aren't just some sort of Sunday afternoons anymore. They're leading to sort of permanent transformations. That's what seems to be happening.
That's the direction.
Yeah, and how long has that taken to go from reallocating space to the imagination of something more permanent? Is that take like, is it 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years?
I would say the first Car-Free Day was organized in December 2018, and now, like 2 years on, we have like a more support and a bigger plan for the future as well. So I would say 2 years too. Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, look, surely we've got some questions about all of these things. We've got about 15 minutes to go. We've heard a lot here about the importance of policy, of design, of presenting the argument, getting it right, so that we think about how pedestrians are an essential part of the economy as much as part of the happiness and life of our cities. And Elleni, I think you've really helped us with that sense of how to transform that that delivery of good ideas into practical actions that actually inspire long-term change. Because I think that's often the thing that we see. We can get stuck at everyone agreeing it's a good idea. I mean, who wouldn't want our children to feel safe from walking around schools, and being able to get everywhere on foot without worrying about their safety?
Yeah.
No one's ever going to say they don't want these things, but it's actually delivering it. I think you've given us some really practical ideas. Now we're collecting questions. I'm not quite sure how I get these questions up. Does anyone want to send me a question, or is someone there to help me sort of find out what is it that people are asking? And we're very happy that we can present it to any of these people here, put them on the spot, and find out how you could maybe cut and paste these ideas, or maybe you've got some suggestions about how things could be a bit different. Okay, until I see a question flashing up on the screen, I'm going to focus in on something that I think that all of you have talked about. We talked about this value. Oh, here we got a question here. Does pedestrian planning take into account disabled people such as wheelchair users, as this has been lacking in the current model? Chris, I think this is something that you, I think, just inherently adopt. Certainly when we talk about walking, we talk about all people, whatever their ability, just as a standard design model. But do you accommodate that in your designs and drawings and policies?
It has to be there, but it's definitely not the norm right now. So, we're still seeing a lot of, I was just visiting some of the new footpaths in Nairobi this morning, and they don't have universal access. It's crazy. So we really need to, make sure that that's inculcated. And, I mean, sometimes we've gone out with engineers, with a wheelchair, and you just try moving around and see if you can. And oftentimes that's really revealing. But yeah, this has been really lacking, and it really requires a lot of attention to detail to get universal access right. And I think oftentimes that's lacking when we rush to finish projects. We're not, attentive enough to the detailed elements of the pedestrian realm. And that's where it in some ways it's more complicated to build a footpath than, to design a carriageway, because people are not used to doing it. Right, so we're not used to figuring out how to, incorporate trees into the design, or move around utility boxes, or reconfigure space to make the universal access work. So
thank you. Yes, I don't know if anybody else wants to comment on that, but I certainly think getting that right. I think working with people with different abilities, I think, is essential. Not trying to work that out on yourself, but actually engaging with people, because we know that in places where walking isn't great, we won't have people with disabilities even feeling able they can go to these places if the streets are really bad. So it's about being proactive in that. Did I see another question there just flash up? I think it was from Carly. Chris, you're right. Oh, she's agreeing with you. Of course she's agreeing with you, Chris, but lots of great examples. But it's that sense of scale. I think this is the question from Carly about how we scale it up in Africa. You've talked about, well, between us, I think lots of solutions, lots of sense of progress. What is holding us back about scale? Is it capacity? Is it just we're all too busy? Or is it competition? I don't know. What do you think, Sean, it is? You talked about representing the arguments around the economy. Is that what's going to scale everything differently, particularly in response to the pandemic?
Well, yeah, I don't want to keep harking on about the money here, but it often just comes down to the money. And I think that in South Africa, case in point is that our national treasury have dedicated funding programs for bus rapid transit, for rail, even for the minibus taxi or matatu recapitalization program, even for electric vehicles, but there isn't a large scale dedicated program to walking and cycling infrastructure. And NMT infrastructure is seen as piecemeal. It's add-ons. It's, here and there. We'll do it on the side. But that's not what it should be. It's the bedrock of our mobility. It's the bedrock of our consumer spending. It should be large-scale, networked infrastructure programs that are, in and of themselves, large competitive tenders, not piecemeal add-ons to existing tenders for roads or BRT or whatever it is. And I think that once we've been able to mainstream NMT as a large-scale infrastructure program of its own, and the businesses start to see their property values increase as the pedestrian infrastructure improves around them, I think we'll start to see a lot more lobbying towards government to drive that kind of land value increase that we're seeing the same lobbying doing for programs.
Okay, thanks
like
very much. Yeah, I think it's a really good point. And Chris, you mentioned about engaging the banks as well, the need for that to actually get this scale right with sensible budgets for these things. We got another question here from Louise about putting the right infrastructure in place requires finances and funding. More about money. Are different countries raising finances to implement these initiatives? I think this is really at the heart of this. So many of these things, I've certainly worked in myself in big cities where they've said all the things you want are too small. They don't cost enough to be visible enough in the budget. Elleni, I just wonder, you started on a reallocation of road space. I mean, just closing a road to traffic for a few hours and getting presumably doesn't cost very much at all. And yet, do that often enough and bring the community with you. You seem to have then got all sorts of money now being talked about as being available for changing streets permanently. Is that the way to actually scale finances? Is that how things work in your experience with WRI?
I would say so. I mean, in Ethiopia, fortunately for cities, for at least governments are pushing this by providing those necessary policies. But what's crucial and critical is, organizing and lobbying community to kind of create that pressure and make sure that there is like a gap. There is huge hierarchy between the ministry and the different layers of government. So implementation has to be at the city scale and sub-city scales. So how do you make decision makers at that level prioritize walking and cycling? So you have to kind of make these constituents demand, that kind of infrastructure be put in place. So working at the community level, creating this awareness and supporting that process as well. It's very, very important, supporting the community to kind of create that kind of pressure. So that's maybe where WRI and other organizations can kind of collaborate and support that engagement.
Yes, I really hear you about this sort of the social justice, but giving permission to the community to ask them what they want and then demonstrate that this is popular. This is what people not just want, but they need it, don't they? To pick up Janine's term, she said this is what communities need, and if only we focus more on need as transport managers, as mobility service operators, we would have maybe slightly different cities than the cities we've got now. Would you agree with that, Chris? Is it, how do we engage those communities to give them that permission to be engaged in the conversations?
Yeah, I think that's true, but then I think communities also need access to the information about what's going on. So a lot of times the problem we have is that the designs for these large-scale projects only get shared once the project's already built, or you realize what's coming once the pavement's already been made. So that's not an equitable way for this to roll out. Like we need, communities need access to the information about the projects. Designs need to be shared beforehand. We need to have genuine participation. So that people can give input, because what, to go back to Nairobi again, some of the recent NMT was done in a hurry. And so that process was skipped because there was pressure to, get something out. But in the process, we missed having that dialogue. And, there were simple issues with the design of the cycle tracks and so on, that if we had had that dialogue with the cycling community, we could have flagged those issues very early on and avoided those challenges. So these projects need to be open. And yeah, and I also just wanted to comment, I saw Carly's comment flash by that, there is funding available, and I couldn't agree more. There's plenty of funding. That's not the issue, right? The issue is that we think of NMT as this piecemeal thing that we should do, a few hundred meters here, then we've done our job on NMT. But actually, we should be doing NMT on all of these large-scale road projects, right? They're already funded, so let's make sure that they include good walking and cycling facilities.
Okay, look, we've got about 5 minutes left. We've got one last question, and then I'm going to ask everyone to just wrap up, I think. Victor, you were asking about what can be done to ensure pedestrian infrastructure is included in suburban and rural African neighborhoods. A really good point. We often focus on the cities, draw pictures of beautiful wide streets, of reallocating space, planting trees and things. Can this be done in suburban and rural areas as well? Who's got some experience of that? Chris, do your design guidance get out of cities and think about these issues too in these other areas?
Yeah, what I'd say about this is so far we've been speaking a lot about street design, but the other part of this is the street network and the fact that in many African cities, we're not planning ahead, especially in the Anglophone cities, we're not planning our street grids in advance of the city expansion. And so in newly developing areas, we don't have very good pedestrian access because street blocks are really large. People have to make big detours to get to the nearest public transport stop. So we have to put much more focus on building street networks. And instead of just investing in one big highway, we should be maybe designing a smaller street that has priority for public transport on it, and then spending more of that money developing the whole street network alongside that main road. And that would help us provide better access in these growing suburban and exurban areas. Thank you. Yeah, and Elleni, have you got a view? I mean, presumably things like closing streets in those rural areas, that's not going to work so well for car-free days in rural and suburban areas, or do you think that's still a potential activity that might work in those places?
I mean, I would say because those areas are predominantly people walk predominantly, so and they are I would say very far away. But if we took in Addis, that's kind of taken on by itself. Maybe we need to look at the way we organize our space in general, because while there are demand for spaces for people to walk in, there are also other characters that are growing up. That's like these gated communities that nobody wants to see. So this how do we make a balance between these two is something that maybe we have to put our heads together too. But in general, making those spaces more safe, more comfortable is a way to go, because whether we like it or not, these people walk right now. They do most of their travel. They meet their travel demands by walking. So making them more comfortable is the way forward, I would say. Jim, if I can just build on what Elleni said, on this point about gated communities, so one city that's taking bold action on that is Kigali, where in the new master plan, gated communities are banned. And any community that already has a gate has to remove it within 1 year of the launch of the plan. So, that's what we really need to do. We have to open up these streets. They need to be publicly accessible. And, and let's find other ways to create security in our cities.
Okay, look, we're running out of time here. We've got 1 minute left. I think we've heard so many great ideas and a sense of momentum, I think. I know there's a question about scale, but what I'm hearing is that change is happening. And it's happening in lots of different places. And that's happening in terms of political commitment. It's happening in terms of policy and design. We've got all those documents to back it up. But the arguments are getting stronger. And I think they're getting clearer. And I think the delivery side of things is starting to happen now, maybe because of COVID in even more places at maybe even greater scale. So can I just thank you all for being part of this great panel, talking about walking, the one thing that everybody does, and it's the number one thing to move around. And of course, getting that right is essential for all the modes and any trip that we make in Africa. So thank you, everyone, for being part of this, for all your great questions. And now back to the studio and on with the rest of the day. But let's not forget how important it is to get walking right. Thank you again.
Thanks so much.
Okay, bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jim, and thank you so much to the panelists. We were actually sitting in studio and listening to the conversations kind of triggered a memory for me. I know here in South Africa, in Sandton, one of the densely populated areas, business hubs of Gauteng, about 2015, we actually did a month of no vehicles in Sandton. I remember there was a lot of people that complained about it, but I was actually working in Sandton at the time, taking the Gautrain in and being able to walk around was one of the most phenomenal experiences. And I don't think we've ever done it since then. And that was in 2015.
Time to do it again.
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah.
So
Get us through nice
definitely
little
agree.
streets.
Thank you so much for your
All right,
time,
thank you.
ladies and gents. We appreciate it.